So this is a post about why it is that I'm unemployed and unemployable. So when I worked in Keighley in system failure, and I know everybody else is really obsessed with the actual CSE aspect of it, but I was more interested in the institutional erosion aspect of it, because I knew that the point in time had come where we were not meeting those responsibilities, that should have been expected, that it was about natural institutional erosion, it was about a reflex response, a policy response that's reflex, so it's never been challenged because these are new systems. And I knew that by the time Brexit came, although I didn't know it would be Brexit, I knew there would be some crisis big enough to contain this, that we would be consolidating those duties. And I thought the best use of my time, given that I was on my own with a toddler, and given austerity had then, for the very same reason, impacted women like me really, really badly, and my peers really badly, and that was subject to complete consensus, that the best use of my time was to observe that crisis. And then by the time the London School of Economics opened their multidisciplinary centre looking at inequality research, which I knew they would do, I didn't know what it would be called, I didn't know, but I knew that they would, because that's the nature of this crisis, that I would be ready to be there, which I was. And then I finished, and I did that, and everything, and I've done everything that I said I would. And now I find myself unemployed and unemployable. And it's actually 8 years of underemployment, self-employment that's been scarce to middling. So I'm going to talk to you about the reasons that I'm unemployable. Now, if in 2010 I had been willing to support the abuse of women that the Labour left were doing to try and hide the political consensus that I was studying, I'd have been fine. I was being groomed at one point. If I'd been willing to write poverty porn for The Guardian that I knew would harm the people I was writing about, if I had been willing to contribute to narratives that were about selling austerity, and I hadn't observed them and made them objects of analysis, I'd be employable. If I had not written so well, then Labour wouldn't have gone after me. So if I had been less bright, if I had been less good at what I did, less articulate, less clear, and not known, and had a structural analysis, and by the time I got to the LSE, I was right. And if you read the overarching narratives about inequality from Anthony Atkinson, James Galbraith, Thomas Piketty, they're all looking for that multidisciplinary understanding, that multi-dimensional understanding of inequality and how our institutions are shaped by it and how it shapes our economy. Policymakers can't get out of a single crisis without that. They can't, they never could, they haven't been able to since 2010, they just haven't known it, and crisis are now going to bring that home to them. The self-ID crisis is like that. And actually, even though I've been in absolute, abject, terrible fucking poverty in the last 8 years, I got my master's, I've written for left and right of the press, I was even shortlisted for the Orwell Prize. It looks like quite an impressive little CV, really. But I've got flat vowels, and I'm northern, and everything that I say, because it's about saying the unpalatable things that need to be said to discuss how power relations shape institutions, the things that we need to be able to get out of this crisis. To understand the institutional failure that will be reconfigured during Brexit, you have to understand that, or else you can't see it, which is why I can see it. And here I am, I'm unemployed, and I'm unemployable, it turns out. So after I graduated, one of the first things that happened after I graduated was that Liam Madigan put me on a list of transphobes. So that's Her Majesty's opposition in the country that I live, put me on a list of women to be watched, targeted and abused for having the understanding of inequality that the state gave me and asked me to learn. Under a Labour government, by the way, a Labour government oversaw the qualification that I got to do this. So nothing that I said should have been a surprise to them. And the reason that I'm unemployable is that every single solitary thing that I say is a threat to them. In fact, it's not just that everything I say, everything that I am is a threat to them, because my existence says that we live in a country where it is not possible for a class to have a purpose if they believe that their identity is about identifying as my representation. My legal rights do not depend on that, and the outcomes of my peers are directly linked to political responsibility on all sides. And here we are. So as well as 8 years of excruciating never-ending, appalling, difficult, terrible fucking poverty. I've also been abused relentlessly for 8 years because that class of people don't know that the 20th century happened and that democracy happened. And TERF is just the latest way that they've got of geeing up abuse of women. But they haven't just abused me, they haven't just put my daughter at risk. They've made me unemployable, and women like Dawn Foster are happy to tell everybody that it's bullying for a single mother to point out that there's complete and perfect consensus on welfare policy and local authority policy. And because we're at the point where the Labour left have actively facilitated 100,000 deaths, they're now in protection of identity mode. It's not, I can't even have a Twitter account. And because the Labour left are not really the problem is class. And the problem is that they're posh kids who are part of a class. This class don't want to know any of this stuff. This class are at think tanks. This class are from 3 universities. And if I had done a master's degree in queer studies and narcissistic word salad, and if I didn't have a complete structural analysis, if I didn't have a multidimensional understanding of the economy, a post-Keynesian understanding of how institutions within it are shaped, if I actually didn't have that, if I actually just had a dissertation that was I identify as and the world will bend to my identity, I'd be fine. But I'm not. I'm unemployable. I'm unemployable in the women's sector because I understand safeguarding and domestic abuse and abusive behaviour patterns and can clearly identify it. And I'm going to be honest with you, like at the minute, I'm not coping well with this because the idea was that I was going to finish the LSE and I was going to be alright after that. That was my plan to get out of poverty. And it's failed because all it's really given me is a ticket to a social network that I don't want to be part of. And that I couldn't get access to anyway. And if I had done what Liam Madigan and Amy Challoner did, and abused women openly and took delight in it, I'd be employable. I'd have a platform. I'd have people wanting to commission me all over the shop. I'd have a fairly well-paid job. If I was willing to sell narratives that were false and that prevented us discussing major institutional failure that is now happening, and if I was willing to just pretend that what I can see in front of me isn't in front of me, I'd be employed. But actually I probably wouldn't, because I'd still be a 40-year-old northern single parent. I'm not really dealing this well with this at the minute, I'm going to be honest with you. I know that the outcome of this is what it is, and I know that the institutions I'm talking about will be redefined in the next 4 to 5 years, exactly as I said that they would. I know that the structure of crisis that I've discussed in those playlists is how that will happen. And everybody wants to know that, but they just don't want to know it from me. And because in order to remove me from the rule of law, I had to be reduced to an object of policy, I then had to be subjected to 8 years of abuse, where people just decided I was unabusable because lone parents are for that. Because they didn't know that that's no longer, viable. And I think the deal is that if I had just accepted everything that I've seen in the last 8 years, if I had just not done that I'd be fine. I made sure on Twitter that I always treated people with respect. But I also did not take shit, and I did not accept people who were using their massive power to cause harm. And I was right to do that. And then when this trans rights stuff started, the same people who did that got themselves at the front of this using their incredible resources, and they made sure that I was no platformed. This is class. This is what a class do to protect their identity. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to sustain this. I don't. My daughter barely knows that we've been poor. I do. And I really don't know how long I'm going to be able to sustain this at all. You can tell that I don't love well. But the reality is that that's not the really damaging thing here. The really damaging thing is that the institutional breakdown that I'm talking about is enough to destabilise an already very unstable country. And the cultures in charge are busy watching Twitter and wasting away watching their own reflections. And the reason that they don't have answers is because anybody who does have answers is treated like me. And is terrorised, and will have newspaper editors deliberately put their daughter at risk of violence, and will have activists coming after their house, and will have the Labour Party put them on lists, and will have their trade unions go after them for discussing what actually should be considered socialism. I don't know what the point of this video is. It's despair. But I think people watch these videos and they think that I'm like this fucking super strong, super woman, and I'm not. The reason I fight so hard is because I don't have a fucking choice. Because I'm unemployable until this changes. And literally, if I ever want to get back to the point where I've got enough money coming in to pay my rent and keep fucking gas in the meter and keep food in the cupboards, literally the only way to get that now is to make sure this changes. Because every door to me is closed until I've done that. That this is the situation in Britain in 2018 should make a lot of people ashamed, but I am not taking responsibility for it. I am not taking responsibility for the psychopaths who just facilitated austerity by pretending they were opposing it. I am not taking responsibility for the impact of major political parties and media institutions defaming me. And I'm not taking responsibility for them reducing me to an object so that I can be abused openly. I quite like having that Twitter account open. I had a look at it this morning. It made me smile. The reason they're scared of me is because I'm an existential threat to them. Well, unfortunately, what that appears to me is that I'm in poverty until I've moved these people aside.